Marvel Snap Zone have the most popular meta report in the community, and every month I roast it, I disagree with it heavily. I'm going to do the same again. However, having had a look at it, I do think the list has improved dramatically. A lot of the decks look more refined. I also will add, I met Den this weekend who does do the meta reports, and now I've met the guy. I'm going to feel a lot worse about roasting it so hard, but I am going to be objective and be honest. We're starting off in tier 1 with Dino Darkhawk, a controversial way to start. Now, let's first talk about the build of the deck. I think it looks super smooth. There's no Chavez, there's no Moon Girl, which is maybe a little bit controversial. However, I can totally understand. Iceman and Doctor Doom are the two cards which have made their way into this list, and both of those are amazing into Sandman decks, which are so popular right now. Iceman being able to hit something like Electro is game winning, and also being able to have that Doctor Doom to play a big points into each lane on turn number 6 is also going to be important against Sandman. And also Iceman's great against Patriot. It just looks like a solid deck. Would I put it in tier 1? Subjectively, without any data to back it up, I wouldn't. I would put it in tier 2. But it's interesting, they think it's the top deck in the meta right now, which I do have a hard time believing. But interesting nonetheless. What do you guys think about Dino Darkhawk? I haven't played much of it, so I'm interested in your comments in the description. In the comments. Your comments in the comments. Electro Ramp also making it into tier 1. Not surprised. Again, let's talk about the list first. I like it quite a lot. I think Sunspot is the most flexible card which you could consider replacing for something perhaps like a Lizard or a Scorpion, or maybe some card like Aero or a nice big 6-cost card. I think Jubilee is also kind of solid in these decks when you're playing the Odin, but this is pretty much card for card how I would play my deck as well. I in fact do like the Sunspot. I think you just could consider getting rid of it. List is super smooth. It deserves to be in tier 1. It would be better, but because it's so popular, there's many decks which are kind of entering the meta to deal with this one, such as Patriot, which we'll get onto in a bit, has a very good matchup into Sandman. Silver Surfer is in tier 1. Oh my goodness, I'm like a proud father. I have been a massive advocate of Silver Surfer decks for the last couple months. Of course, they were very meta for a while, but I think it's been a deck that's been severely underrated. Being able to play Storm and Killmonger is a really good reason to play Surfer, because they're just two great cards. This list looks nice. I have 3 differences in the list I play. I don't play Nova or Sarah. In those places, I have Lizard and I have Jeff, who I think Jeff is a fantastic addition to Silver Surfer decks. You're able to get more points into your Storm lane. Also, just gives you that nice turn 2 play. Goose on turn 5 is the absolute money card in Silver Surfer, because you have so much information over how your opponent's playing. You might have stormed the location, then Goose is super restrictive over where your opponent is able to play on turn 6, and then you know where to Juggernaut, where to Cosmo. I also don't play Polaris. I play the Kingpin for the Juggernaut synergy and the Spice. But Rogue, absolutely phenomenal in Silver Surfer. Awesome to see it making it into tier 1. I wouldn't put it in tier 1 though personally. I would put it at the top of tier 2. Again, with no data to back me up, just subjective opinion, and I have played an awful lot of this deck. It is worth mentioning this has a surprisingly good matchup into Sandman, and it also, while I haven't played it as much, seems like it has a pretty good matchup into Patriot as well, because you have the Rogue to deal with things like Blue Marvel and Patriot, and then you also have the Killmonger, where you can remove all of the Ultron bots if you play it correctly. So pretty excited to see this one being so high. Again, I would put it in top of tier 2. Patriot Ultron, I would also definitely be putting in tier 1. I haven't had too much chance to experiment with this deck myself. Does look a little bit wonky. I think Doctor Doom and Ultron is not correct. I think that you want to be having a few more options, and therefore Doom and Ultron just kind of clash a little bit too much. I think Abomination is great in these decks. I actually don't mind Onslaught if you do want to play 2 6-cost cards. What I would recommend doing is net decking my version of the deck, which I shared a couple days back from the Frame Break tournament. So a great start, I would say, for the meta report overall. I think the lists all look well built. I agree, and it's exciting to see so many decks in tier 1. I do think you could make a case though, maybe to separate like tier 1 into 2 groups, or just put the Silver Surfer deck and the Dino Darkhawk deck at the top of tier 2. But let me know what you guys think on that. Do you agree with Dino Darkhawk and Silver Surfer making it into tier 1, or do you agree with me that they probably aren't quite as good as the other decks in tier 1? Awesome, let's move on to tier 2. Doomwave. Doomwave is a deck. They put Goose in, then put Goose in. I was raving to him about how much I love Goose in this deck, and this build looks really nice. This might be the exact way I would play the deck, in fact. Oh my goodness, this has made me very happy. I think this is a very good deck. There was also a bit of a resurgence of Deathwave at the tournament. In fact, Deathwave won it. This is a deck I've really been wanting to find the perfect list for and have struggled. The idea with this one is you play Wave on turn number 5, and then on turn 6 you're able to play She-Hulk and another card. The America Chavez is actually quite a controversial inclusion in this one, but it is something I quite like. It's going to increase the odds of you getting your Wave on turn 5, but it's going to decrease the odds of you finding your She-Hulk and finding your Doom. One other thing that this deck is maybe lacking is another card to play on turn 6 with your She-Hulk. Something like an Arrow, something like a Leader could be a nice addition, but you do have the Shang-Chi as an option. Iceman is very good, as we've discussed already. Mr. Fantastic is nice because you want to be getting ahead into multiple lanes. And then you have the Zabu, Darkhawk, and Rockside package, which also makes your Shang-Chi a little bit cheaper as well. I think you could definitely build this a different way and not go Zabu, Darkhawk, Rockside, Korg, but I can certainly see the logic of it, and I really do like this build. If there was one thing I would say, maybe, I know controversial, you could consider cutting the Chavez for something like an Arrow or maybe a Leader as just like an extra card to play with your Wave, but this is me talking. I'm never going to slag off a Chavez, and I do think getting that Wave on turn 5 is super crucial for this deck, so Chavez does make a lot of sense. And the Goose is in there. Brilliant. Awesome. Okay, Doomwave also gets a mention, and this might be the list from the Explorer tournament. I'm not exactly sure. I am going to be sharing a list on that in the next couple days, so I'm not going to talk too much about this list. This honestly looks a little bit wonky for Deathwave. It looks like it's just a different way of playing Doomwave. And here we have Deathwave. All right, Deathwave, yeah, as I mentioned, very good performance in the tournament this weekend, and this list looks pretty much bang on. I think this deck does want to play Squirrel Girl though, but again, I would just net deck the deck from the Frame Break tournament, and I am going to be posting that probably tomorrow or certainly in the next couple of days. And I do agree with this being in tier 2 after its performance this weekend. It really did impress me. Thanos Ongoing also makes it into tier 2. There's all sorts of ways to build Thanos. Nobody really knows the best way still. This has been the most popular, and I would definitely agree with Thanos being a tier 2 deck. I also much prefer decks with armor that are protecting your Infinity Stones with cards like Blue Marvel and Khazar over ones playing Death. I think they are better for the ladder. Another Thanos Lockjaw deck. I'm assuming this one also had Lockjaw. It actually didn't, which I don't like. I think you still just want to play Lockjaw. I think this is kind of troll not to play Lockjaw. So some kind of hybrid between the two is probably what I would play. This one looks more like the kind of deck that I would recommend. I think it's very silly not to play Lockjaw. I really like the Wasp in Thanos decks as well. Particularly now you can only recycle 1 stone per turn. This allows you 1 card per turn with Lockjaw. This allows you, for example, on turn 3 to play Lockjaw and Wasp, and then on turn 4 play an Infinity Stone and something else. The other thing to note with this deck now is the Green Stone, the Energy Stone on turn 1 into Lockjaw on turn 3 is... Lockjaw on turn 2 is going to be the optimal way of playing this if you're able to do so, because it's more difficult to cycle your Lockjaw. The other thing that this deck got better at being able to do is getting reliable points into the Lockjaw location, because, for example, on turn 6, you could play a Stone and Iron Man into the Lockjaw lane. The Stone would cycle with Lockjaw, but the Iron Man would actually stay there and not cycle back. So that is one thing that this deck is now better at doing. But overall, it got worse, but I think it's a really solid deck. And also, there's going to be less Killmongers coming. Even like Silver Surfer decks, there's maybe an argument to cut them at the moment. I'm still playing it in mine, but you could consider cutting Killmonger maybe in Surfer decks because there's less Sunspots doing the rounds. So that's something to bear in mind as well. Okay, awesome. Up next we have like just like a normal Lockjaw deck, which I think is also like a fine deck. We have like a Thanos Death deck, which again, I think this is a good deck more for tournaments, and this build looks pretty smooth as well. Galactus makes it into tier 2, which I'm really happy to see. This has been a deck which has been constantly put in tier 3, and I've been a big fan of putting it into tier 2. Still not a deck that I own, a card that I own, so I can't talk about it too much. The only card which really jumps out as me, well, there's 2 cards that maybe jump out at me as a surprise, which is going to be Shuri and Taskmaster. I also think Yondu is a really nice inclusion in this one to feed your Death and feed your Null. I also think that Spider-Man should still be solid in Galactus, so you can wave into Galactus on turn 4 and then Spider-Man on turn 5 just to get those 2 cube victories, but can't comment on it too much. You definitely want the Shang-Chi, the Death. The Destroyer is nice, the Galactus, the Null, the Octopus, the Electro and the Wave. these other slots like the Shuri, the Taskmaster, the Daredevil, and the Sunspot are all open for interpretation. But I think Taskmaster, Daredevil, and Shuri all seem a little bit off to me, particularly the Shuri, actually. Okay, cool. This is another build of Galactus. Again, not going to talk too much about it. Also, this one doesn't have Chavez, which I think is also a big mistake. So, don't like the Galactus Fist too much, to be honest with you, but I do agree with its position. Okay, moving on to tier 3, we have Discard Dracula. This is very similar to the deck that I posted just a few hours ago, the Adodo deck. It does have Storm in here, though, which he wasn't playing. And I actually don't hate the idea of Storm into this deck. You've got Morbius, which can get supercharged. You can play Drac on 4. I actually really like the addition of Storm, although I'm not 100% sure what got cut for it. I'm also not massively convinced by Sunspot in these decks personally, but I do quite like the Wolverine edition. Now that you don't want to play Lockjaw in these kinds of decks, I think that having a Wolverine in there as an extra discard target does make a decent amount of sense. But yeah, looks like a pretty cool list. Sunspot does have synergy with Storm as well, and often on turn 6 you might skip the turn. So actually, I really like this list. I really like this list. And I would agree with it being tier 3. Maybe it could creep into tier 2. Shuri gets put into tier 3, which I probably agree with, but I do think this deck is underrated somewhat. The list looks fine, not really too much to talk about. I think the arrow seems a bit random, but apart from that, it looks pretty smooth. I think this deck is underrated. This should have good matchups into into Patriot and into Sandman, which are dominating the meta on ladder, at least in terms of play percentage, right? So I think that Shuri might make a bit of a comeback and find its way into tier 2. I actually think Chavez is really nice in Shuri right now because armor on 2 is so important because of the amount of Shang-Chi's doing the rounds. All right, Bounce Monkey makes it into tier 3. Probably would be higher if it wasn't for the popularity of Sandman, and also Wave on 5 really disrupts this deck. I do agree that Bounce Monkey is pretty nice. Would I play the same list? I think the Falcon can go for a Black Widow. I think Black Widow is actually amazing in this deck. Being able to bounce the Black Widow back with Beast, with also the Bast synergy. I think it's more valuable than the Falcon with the Darkhawk synergy as well. And then it's pretty much exactly Jeff Hoogland's deck from the Infinity Gauntlet tournament a month ago or so now, but with the addition of Hitmonkey. That'll be the only change I would make, but you can definitely still play Falcon. I haven't tested it too much. Okay, so overall, we're going to rate this meta report out of 10. I'm actually going to give it a solid 8 out of 10. I think it's a huge improvement on the ones we've had in the past. Again, I'm basing this purely off subjective opinion. I think the most controversial things is that Dino Darkhawk is in tier 1 and actually at the top of it. I also think Silver Surfer being in tier 1 is pretty controversial. Apart from that, I think it's honestly a really good effort. A few of the decks, which I discussed, looked a little bit wonky and not perfected, but again, it's all just a subjective opinion. I am going to be sharing my own meta report video in the coming days. I'm hoping to get a professional player, Moyen, who finished second place at the Frame Break tournament, to join me for one. I'm going to try like a bit of a different style, and we're also then going to share our favorite versions of each deck, so you get a couple of different opinions from Moyen, who is the top player in the game right now, arguably, and also from myself. Hope you're looking forward to that one. Give the video a like if you watch this far, and shout out to Den and Marvel Snap Zone for the awesome high-level content. See you soon. Bye.